Hi teachers, welcome back to Coding with Confidence, the virtual edition. I hope you enjoyed your 8 to 9 hour where you had a chance to create your Scratch account and just kind of poke around a little bit and see what Scratch is all about. This next hour we're going to kind of get started doing some work, and first I wanted to kind of give you some tips and tricks that might help you to feel more successful, feel less frustrated as you're getting started using Scratch for the first time. So the first thing you need to know is that there is some vocabulary related to Scratch that you won't hear other places, so at first it seems a little strange. In Scratch, a character is always called a sprite, and the little cat is always the first sprite in a project. You don't have to keep him. You can easily delete him and replace him with a character that fits your project better, but the Scratch cat will always show up. A script is the code for a certain character or event. So when you link a whole bunch of blocks together, it makes a script. A block is just one line of code represented by a little colorful block in Scratch. And by the way, the colors of the blocks do matter, so you'll get used to the fact that certain colors are for certain types of things you want to accomplish. A costume is a sprite's appearance at any one point in time. It could be the color, so a blue sprite, and then if I want him to be red, I can make another costume, or he can be left facing, right facing, his hands can be in a different position. Those would all be considered costumes of the same sprite. The stage is the work area, and a backdrop is just a background. When you're in Scratch, your work area looks roughly like this. I will warn you that there have been several versions of Scratch over the years. I think we're up to Scratch 3.0, but it doesn't change tremendously from version to version. What I have noticed is there are differences in the locations of some of these items, like sometimes the stage is on the left instead of the right. Same with the location of the sprites and the add a sprite or add a backdrop button. Sometimes they're on the left instead of the right. But your blocks are always color coded, so if I click on any one of these little colors, I'll get a different set of blocks to work from. I've got a costumes tab, a sounds tab, and then this is my actual project. Like, this is my view at what I've built so far, which so far is nothing except for the cat sprite. You have a full screen choice up there. I have the start and the stop. But that's the basic look of Scratch, pretty much no matter what version you're in. There are just a few changes in locations for the most part from version to version. And then there are a few blocks that have been added over the course of the versions, or a few blocks that are now worded somewhat differently than they used to be, but nothing too dramatic. Usually, if you keep in mind that something may have changed since the last version, you can still find what you're looking for. It just might be a different color, or the wording might be slightly different. This little kind of grayed out sprite tells you that the script on this area would apply only to this sprite. And that's one of the hardest things that I have found for people to remember about Scratch, is that you are building and you are coding each individual component separately. So if I build a code in this area right now, what I'm building only applies to this cat. It doesn't apply to any other character, any other piece of my backdrop, or anything else that I build. If I had another character down here, another sprite, I would need to click on that sprite and code him separately. Now, if I wanted the two characters to do the same thing, I can copy and paste the code, but it must appear in both places for both sprites to behave the way my code tells them to. So keep in mind when you're coding to always pay attention to which sprite is highlighted. Make sure you're working on the sprite that you mean to be working on, because that can be something that people run into trouble with. So let me give you the good and the bad and the ugly about Scratch, as far as I see it anyway. The good is that Scratch gives you total creative freedom. You can literally create anything that you can imagine. It's like a blank canvas for an artist, right? I give them a blank canvas and I give them paints or pencils. They can make anything they can imagine. Scratch is very similar to that. It is actually a really powerful tool. The fact that it has the colorful blocks and the fun characters might make it at first seem pretty elementary based, but in reality the coding is very, very powerful, so it can do anything you want it to do. And the fact that you can then add your own characters, draw your own characters, takes away any of that elementary feel. It is block style coding, so you don't have to remember any programming language, don't have to learn any programming language. It encourages problem solving, critical thinking, that whole deductive reasoning, breaking a project down, starting one step at a time. It is open to creators of all ages. Feedback is provided by other users, and so it's always nice when you're building something or making something to get feedback. You can model after a project that already exists rather than starting from that total blank slate. You can start with a project that exists, make a copy of it for yourself, and then they call it remixing it. So I can change the characters, I can change a few things, and I have a new project based on someone else's. There's a huge community of Scratch users all over the world, and so you can always get feedback, you can always get input, and there are so many resources available online. I have books about Scratch. Because it's such a big community, the resources are really endless, so you're never really left kind of floundering out on your own. I guess the bad would be that Scratch does require some experience with block style coding, or it can get kind of frustrating. I find when I use it in the classroom, students who have had no block style coding experience struggle a bit, because it is a very kind of a unique way of thinking that I am building the events one piece at a time, and that when this happens, then this needs to happen, and this needs to happen. So it's a unique way of thinking that requires some practice. Another bad would be that total creative freedom can actually sometimes be overwhelming. I think we've all experienced that whole, I have a blank sheet of paper in front of me and I don't know what to write, or I have a blank canvas and I don't know what to paint. Scratch is much the same way. You really do have to have an idea of what you want to create, something you want to say, or something you want to share, or else you just end up kind of like throwing stuff on the canvas and it doesn't really get any kind of continuity. Scratch, probably along with any kind of programming or coding, does require some perseverance, some determination to stick with the coding until you get the appearance that you want. Creating is a really powerful process, but it's also very time consuming and it requires some dedication. Scratch is no different. The ugly, of course, related to schools, we run into some things that we need to be careful about. First, other users can make comments on shared games and projects, which of course opens the door for inappropriate comments, or at least problems related to comments that are posted. Scratch is open to creators of all ages, which again can be a blessing or a curse. It can be a community of people really sharing ideas and projects, or it can open the door to some problems. Scratch monitors pretty closely, but of course, it's just something you need to be aware of. Total creative freedom can also, unfortunately, sometimes equal concerning content. Letting people make whatever they want to make and post it online opens that door, and sharing that with other users, allows for the possibility of some inappropriate content. But again, if you look at Scratch's terms of service, the agreement is that you won't post inappropriate content, and it'll be taken down if it is posted. But we all know that there may be that tiny window of time where someone may stumble across something that isn't totally appropriate. So be forewarned if you're going to use in your classroom to kind of just make sure that you have that conversation with students about appropriate content and what to do if there is inappropriate content visible on Scratch. I have had the experience where schools can block Scratch, probably because of the sharing and commenting component. I have had the experience where I had students in the middle of Scratch projects and we came to school the next day and bang, Scratch was blocked. I had to talk to my technology department about, where it went and what the problem was, where the complaints came from. One of the other issues that sometimes comes up is you can go into Scratch and basically just play other people's games. You could do that all day if you wanted to. And students will get caught up playing other people's games rather than creating their own content. So I have a requirement in my classroom to kind of address that with students, that when we're on Scratch, we're creating, we're not just consuming other people's creations. So something you want to be aware of and make your students aware of. Not that I totally forbid playing other people's games, because that's part of the community of Scratch, but you have to have some guidelines in place where you may have students just playing games and not actually coding. So for this next hour, what I wanted you to take a look at was to first watch the video that you're currently watching, which was on slide 12 of my slideshow. And then I'd like you to be able to choose a tutorial to try out as your first project. And I'll show you how to get there in just a second. You're going to follow the directions and create a basic first project. If you finish the project that the tutorial leads you through, use some extra time to change up the project a bit from the original version. You could add another character, add some more movement or some music. And then I would like you to post a screenshot and a link to your Scratch project on any of the following slides. I have, I think, 4 slides in place for you to make your post. Please keep in mind that this is a first try for many of you, and nobody is worried about it being perfect or super complicated. This is very much just step 1 in the learning process of learning to use Scratch. If you still have some more time before 10 o'clock, feel free to check out what your classmates created and what they post on those slides. Play their games, make some comments, give them some feedback so that they are now part of the Scratch community and you have kind of given them some information about the quality of what they've created. If while you're working you come across any questions that you want to discuss in our 10 o'clock Zoom meeting, please add them to slide 22. I just made space for you to type anything that you want to start out our 10 o'clock hour with. So if you take a look, here are places for you to post your project. You have to click share, by the way, before you can get the link. So there's 2 of those, and then 2 that say take a few minutes to check out what your classmates created. And then here is our question and answer slide.